Good morning, and I hope you can hear me. So my name is Fabrizio Felloni. I'm Deputy Director of Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD, and I'm moderating this session, which is dedicated to managing infrastructure investments with perspectives from country programs. So this session will be brief and will feature 5 colleagues at IFAD who have strong experience in this area. So I'm going to first name them, and then I will introduce them separately as they speak. So there are Paxina Chileshe, Ivan Cossio, Tarek Kotb, Roshan Cooke, and Shankar Achuthan. And the key questions that we are going to ask them to address are the following. First of all, what are the common challenges that they found in the design, in procurement, management, and follow-up of projects which have a strong component of infrastructure? How they were able to address the potential trade-offs, particularly in the cooperation between different partners on infrastructure. And 3, what is their view about the comparative advantages of IFAD? So we are giving them a little bit of challenge because we are asking them to stay in 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm sure they'll prepare very well and will be able to be crisp and up to the point. And so I would like to start first with our colleague Paxina Chileshe, and she is Regional Climate and Environment Specialist. So I would like to first give her the floor, and then we'll hear from our colleagues. Paxina, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio, and good morning, good afternoon. In terms of the question that has been asked, I'll come at this from the IFAD Social, Environment and Climate Assessment Procedures. So from the SECAP, looking at the design phases and implementation stages for the project. So as you introduced, I work in the East and Southern Africa division, mainly in this region, working, of course, with our experts from the countryside. And in terms of some of the common challenges that we have faced in the region, these are to do with the timely production and the studies that need to be done, that need to accompany the infrastructure project development. And in this case, we do know that for most of the IFAD projects that we have in the region, the infrastructure sites themselves are not specified during design. And as such, we need to develop environment and social management frameworks. And these frameworks provide us with guidance on how to manage environment and social risks that will result from the project interventions. And as such, when we do develop these, one of the challenges that we have faced in the past is the cost of some of these studies, because locally the costs vary. And in a sense, ensuring that we do have the required stakeholder consultation, particularly at some of the sample site levels, brings in some additional perspective. In terms of the costs themselves, these are also linked to the fact that some of our countries do not have specific regulations on approvals of environment and social management frameworks. They do have these for specific impact analysis that will happen at the site of the infrastructure when we're in the implementation stage. So our frameworks will provide us with this, they'll provide this clear screening procedures for environmental and social management risks. So if I move quickly onto the implementation phase. So once we have developed these environmental and social management frameworks, during implementation, we develop the environment and social impact analysis or impact assessments at the project site. And these will require us to have the information. In some cases, we do face the challenge that some of the countries, we don't have enough local capacity to be able to undertake these studies. And so we have to rely on international experts. So this also sometimes increases the costs of doing some of these studies. So building local capacity is important to undertake these studies. And this will, of course, help us also on the IFAD side, so having this local capacity. In some cases, the approval process that is required for the studies, and once the results have been provided from the government agencies, it has to be well timed and managed so that there's no delays in the actual rollout of the infrastructure development. So the phasing of the studies is important, as it is doing these studies, mainly they have to be done at the feasibility stage of the infrastructure development. And this in sometimes is not sequenced well, and we end up with the impact analysis not fully informing the detailed design. And this is part of what results in some of the challenges that Johanna had mentioned in some of the sustainability issues that also come up. So if we ensure that the sequencing is correct, we can also have some of the sustainability issues looked into, and also ensure that we don't have any adverse impact on the environment. One of the other key elements now is the integration of climate risk analysis in the studies that are being done. And we have had several discussions with engineers, and engineers will normally include climate scenarios, but of course they look at historic climate trends and not the future projections that will be there. So the implications of this and making sure that we can actually have this forward-looking climate projections integrated into our detailed designs for the infrastructure will also ensure this climate resilience building, but also ensure that our infrastructure can be able to provide what is required in the benefits on the long term for the smallholders. So I just want to emphasize that what is important also is the stakeholder consultation, making sure that this is documented and we have the free, prior, and informed consent from the communities. And this will help us also with enhancing ownership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent points, Paxina, excellent points. I would like now to turn to our colleague Ivan Cossio, and he is currently country director for Indonesia, but he has a very long experience as country director in many other countries, including in Latin America. So Indonesia is a country program where we have a large portion of investments dedicated to infrastructure. So let us hear what have been your experiences from Indonesia. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabrizio, and thank you, IOE colleagues, for inviting to this event. I will take advantage of previous experience, but also will somehow focus on the lessons learned and the challenges from the Indonesia project Fabrizio just mentioned. We're talking about a very large irrigation project, infrastructure irrigation project, with IFAD financing of 100 million euro. It is today around $110 million, $600 million from the Asian Development Bank, 100 and something million from the government. We're talking about more than 40 million of the total project. It is said that this is the largest ever project in IFAD. What I am going to say is focus on the challenges and learnings as said, and in the 4 minutes I have, I'll make 4 points. The first point is the following. It is very important to take into account since design how important the project architecture is. And what I'm thinking about, I'm talking about the financial architecture, the co-financing that is so important and increasingly important for IFAD, that at the end of the day means who finances what. There is a strong tendency in IFAD to increase co-financing ratios with other international partners, so that in many cases we finance the software with our relatively little money, while largest partners finance the heavy investments with largest amounts of money. This is a tendency. In this case, as mentioned before, the Asian Development Bank finances all the infrastructure for irrigation infrastructure, and we finance all the, let's say, software part, meaning training, extension services, capacity building, so that there is a clear differentiation from that. It could be seen as an interesting arrangement, but I believe that it brings a lot of challenges. First of all, Imagine $110 million in soft activities, training, farmers, field schools, extension services. Of course, we need much more than 5 or 6 years to disburse these amounts of money and to implement all these activities. It's too much money only in the soft part with slow disbursements. And the risk that this is linked from the investment themselves. So the lessons here are, first, in my opinion, IFAD should avoid financing only the soft activities and investments. Second, we should continue building partnerships, but the project architecture should ensure that we will succeed with or without a successful partnership, because of the challenges that are clearly mentioned by in the report that we are discussing today, procurement, M&E, and a number of others. And there is also the risk that the capacity development is detached from the hard investments. Just as an example, we are going very, very, very slowly in this project. After 4 years of implementation, the disbursement is 13.5% from our side, while from the Asian Development Bank, that goes much better, but not better enough, it's around 30%. There was COVID, etc. Okay, but it's not enough explanation. Second point, timing and sequencing. The agricultural activities started almost at the same time that the final design of the sub-projects of concrete investments also started. It means that in most of the cases, the irrigation schemes are going to be ready to be used when, and I'm going a little bit ironic here, when the project is over. So that the beneficiaries of the agricultural side won't benefit from the irrigation. And if they do, because the infrastructure will remain, the risk is that all the maintenance, strengthening of water users association and all of that is not going to be there, because the infrastructure will come when everything will be almost over. Third point, sustainability. Since design, we should have very clear regarding, because when we talk about sustainability in this case, I'm thinking mainly, not only, but mainly in operation and maintenance. Since design, it should be absolutely clear who pays, who is in charge of it, and whether these persons, people, organizations, institutions have the capacities to do that. Last point, the social fabric. The water users associations of the beneficiaries of irrigation tends to be seen as a sort of privileged farmers in the villages or communities. It's impossible or almost impossible for an irrigation project to benefit all farmers due to a number of aspects that I won't mention here. But there is somehow a potential conflict between farmers' organizations and water users associations. And we should absolutely avoid proposing, encouraging to have these two kind of separated organizations. We have to strongly work for having interconnections and complementarities. Otherwise, we're going to damage the social local fabric, and it's not good to do that, thinking that we have to be led by the idea of leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivan, for the crisp, short, and well-structured points that you have made. Now, I would like to turn to our colleague, Tarek Kotb, who is lead global technical specialist in water and rural infrastructure at IFAD, but previously was country director in South Asia, and before in the Near East and North Africa region. So he has also a strong technical expertise in infrastructure, and so we are delighted to have you here. The floor is yours, Tarek.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio, and thank you all colleagues in IOE. Great opportunity and chance actually to be with you today. Let me go direct to the subject and start with one of the many challenges that facing infrastructure at the smallholder level, which is the country limited capacity to identify, design, and deliver quality service. We sometimes receive different lists of infrastructure works from the government at different stages of the design, as recently happened in Sri Lanka for the rehabilitation of series of water tanks called cascades. This was because of the lack of baseline information on the one hand, and also the top-down instructions flavored with some political bias on the other. The entry point for infrastructure identification, in my opinion, should be extension services or field mobilizers, which usually do not have sufficient capacity to introduce projects, including the recipe of proposed infrastructure interventions. These can delay project mobilizing communities in terms of manpower for community-built infrastructure, and most importantly, to share the costs of construction, operation, and maintenance, the main elements for sustainability, as said earlier. In most situations, the implementation of infrastructure, whether construction or rehabilitation, took longer than planned if the farmers were sufficiently convinced and fully involved in the identification, construction, or in some cases, the supervision of implementation. However, the results were very impressive in these cases, mainly the better quality and continued operation and maintenance of the facilities by community groups, such as the cases of some irrigation improvement interventions in Egypt, harvesting ponds in Jordan and Lebanon, and watershed management facilities in Nepal as part of a local adaptation plans. I was also satisfied with the quality of the rural roads built by the tea societies in Sri Lanka. Societies were technically led by a government dispatched engineer. Beneficiaries have appreciated the multiple benefits these roads are bringing, and not only for transporting tea production to markets, but also for children going to school, senior people visit temples and clinics, in addition to the daily use of the regular rural people. We were able to reallocate accordingly the project funds to do more of this type of infrastructure, as the demand was high with all the support from governments and communities. In this context, I would like to mention a number of comparative advantages that IFAD has and can significantly use to scale up its support to rural infrastructure. First, our specializations in satisfying the needs of small farmers and producers. And second, working along the value chain from product selection, production to marketing, thereby supporting the construction and rehabilitation of a wide variety of micro and last mile infrastructure. However, there are still some issues to consider. For example, do we have sufficient internal capacity to provide the necessary support? Are all member countries aware that IFAD can work with them to develop infrastructure at a smallholder level? Can we mobilize more resources for infrastructure development at the smallholder level? Do we need to do much more in the field of renewable energy? Have we been succeeding in finding a balance between hard and soft infrastructure, including governance? And should we also support medium-sized infrastructure if needed? Quick responses, for the sake of time, will incorporate lots of positivity. We will have to do more to support rural infrastructure, absolutely, as global demand is increasing rapidly, and we should be responsive to that. And this would make smallholder farmers, governments, and development partners very happy, thus mobilizing more co-financing and also human resources. We should also use partners and communities of practice at the national and regional level to compensate for any lack of capacity on the ground. We need to continue to produce operational knowledge management products, documenting our experience with a smallholder infrastructure, and sufficiently communicate this to countries through community teams, through the country teams and learning events. There are also great opportunities to do much more on renewable energy interventions, which are now gaining more and more attention from the PMI. Above all, and at the end, we should not hesitate to support medium-sized infrastructure when needed for specific projects, as long as the need is strongly justified. Let me stop there, and thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, Tarek. Excellent points. And the next speaker, he is Roshan Cooke. Roshan currently is country director for Nepal and Bhutan. But those who are familiar with him may remember that for many years he's been technical advisor. And so his experience has been, and if I may so also his heart, has been for many years in natural resource management and climate change adaptation. And so, Roshan, let us hear from you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. And actually, I will speak with my former hat as the regional climate and environment specialist, because that's my experience, as you said. The two areas that I want to look at, one is around the engineering norms, the outdated engineering norms in many countries, and also kind of picking up a little bit on what Paxina was talking about, the limited or in some cases, no climate scenario planning. And the second area I want to look at is the lack of the use of nature-based approaches or bioengineering as an alternative or as a complement to concrete and brick and mortar infrastructure works. So I was involved with the design of 6 ASAP projects. And that gave me some really a good insight into how things are happening on the ground. At the time, many of the countries, did not look at climate scenarios when they were locating their infrastructure or when they were designing their infrastructure, and this has a major impact on the resilience of this of the infrastructure over the long term. As Paxina mentioned, at best, countries were looking at historical data, but not doing any kind of forward scenario planning. And given the fact that we are seeing a lot more intensity of climate impacts, so these events, what we call black swan events, which are supposed to happen in 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 500 years, we're seeing more frequent occurrences of these events. We need to be looking at how to designing the infrastructure works based on those scenarios. Now, the fact that in many countries the engineering norms are quite archaic, we see constantly in the field, not IFAD projects, some IFAD projects, but also government projects where they've put in dams for reservoirs, etc., that have broken down due to a heavy rainfall event. So this is a big issue. Now there has been some movement on this. I understand there are some of the IFIs like ADB have been assisting the countries with upgrading the engineering norms, etc. But I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that front. So the approach that we took in the ASAP projects, which is, I'm glad to see also the evaluation bring this out, that we looked at, small scale, reversible infrastructure works, because what we didn't want to do also was to contribute to any kind of maladaptation over the long term. So having small scale reversible infrastructure was really important. Okay, the other area that to look at was the use of nature-based approaches of bioengineering. Most people, when we talk about infrastructure, they think of concrete and they think of brick and mortar, and this is a bit of a challenge. But I'm happy to see from the evaluation that there's been a lot of investments in sustainable land management approaches. So that's a good thing. But I think we can do a lot more on that. And I just want to give you a little example from the Bangladesh project, the Haur project, the HILIP, the Haur Infrastructure and Livelihood Improvement Project, and the Climate Adaptation and Livelihood Improvement Project in the Haur region in northeast Bangladesh. This is a very unique geography. It's an oxbow lake. It's this huge indentation which gets flooded for about 6 months of the year. And people actually live on earthen mounds, human constructed earthen mounds they have their houses on top of that. So talking about resilient people, you don't get more resilient people than the Haor folks. But these earthen mounds have been getting increasingly hit by wave action, both because of increasing depth of the flood and also because of the heating of the water and intense winds. So the wave action has been increasing. So there's a real need to, for protecting these. And we work through the local government engineering department, the LGED, which is a fantastic organization, and they do amazing things. But their perspective is, concrete based. So they were looking at how, their go-to response is, okay, let's put concrete protection around these mounds. Now, this is a very costly endeavor. So what we did was we ran a small pilot to test different options, and one of the options that was proposed was to look at concrete blocks with 4 holes in them, and that we would plant vetiver grass. Now, for some of you, you might be familiar with vetiver. It's a grass that has a very extensive rooting system, and it can grow up to something like 4 meters in 1 year. And it's an amazing, a plant for securing soil. I just read the supervision from last year, and I was thrilled to see that actually this intervention proved to be extremely effective. In some cases where the concrete block got dislodged, the vetiver grass remained, and it still provided that slope stabilization for that infrastructure. But it's such a challenge to get the LGED, whose mindset is concrete, to look at these other alternatives, right? Now, this is a very cost-effective way of doing slope stabilization. The fact that the production of the stems or the propagules of vetiver can be done by landless poor around their households, and it could be a large income generating intervention, given the extent of infrastructure works in Bangladesh. So this is these are opportunities that have multiple benefits from an environmental side, in terms of cost reductions, in terms of actual robustness of infrastructure, and it being a regenerative approach. It has many what's the word I'm looking for? Many benefits. So anyway, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roshan. Excellent points, and it was nice also to have a concrete project example. So now I would like to turn to Shankar Achuthan. Shankar is the procurement specialist in the Asia and the Pacific division of IFAD. Procurement is fundamental if we want to ensure high quality of infrastructure execution. So we would really like to hear from you. What has been your experience? Over to you, Shankar.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Fabrizio. Okay. What we've seen throughout my experience with working with within the region in APR is in extensively covering from the multiple countries that we work with, from the Pacific right up to Afghanistan, is that a lot of infrastructure, as what Paxina mentioned, is that we work with very small, fragmented sometimes infrastructure, which is not really identified during designs. Okay, the infrastructure sites or the locations and also the length or the kinds or types of infrastructure is not very clearly identified. So during designs itself. So designs do not go into details about where the sites are, the studies are missing. So this takes a while for us to actually get around to, or the government itself to actually undertake the designs. So this is one that causes delays that basically come about. Second is the sequencing or the planning the planning of infrastructure. Once the designs and all that, the studies are ready and the designs are all ready, the cost tables, primarily given that designs do not look at and the designs of infrastructure is not very clear, cost overruns do happen, technically speaking, after a few years, because technically after the design itself is already a few years backdated by the time the actual infrastructure gets done. And given that cost norms are built on a particular type of infrastructure, right? They do not look at types of infrastructure, meaning, for example, roads in hilly terrains, difficult terrains, right? Hilly, hillside regions and all of this, these have an impact. So what happens is that when the infrastructure gets done, the projects tend to cut short or reduce the scale of infrastructure to fit particular types of cost norms. So this itself has an impact on the quality of the infrastructure going in the long run and the sustainability of some of this infrastructure itself. The other aspect is where we don't find usual problem areas in infrastructure is in the tendering and the evaluation process, which can be quite straightforward and it's fast. You will have a lot of competition on infrastructure. Where we usually find challenges is in the area of supervision and contract management. Okay. Now the assumption is that government or the supervising engineers that are available with government is available to actually supervise a lot of this what you call IFAD infrastructure. Unfortunately, we have seen in many cases, given that the capacity available at that level, the engineers that are available at that particular level to actually supervise, or the volume of work which is actually there, these engineers are not readily available to actually undertake site inspections and also site supervisions adequately at the time when actually infrastructure is actually being implemented or when the contract is actually being implemented. So this in turn causes significant delays or quality issues whenever these infrastructures are built, because they're small, fragmented, because there's very little incentive mechanisms there. And we have in one particular case in a project in Sri Lanka several years ago, which was heavily invested. We were investing heavily with irrigation infrastructure in the northern areas of Sri Lanka in Iranamadu. We realized that IFAD had to, when the IFAD identified the delays were caused by the actual non-availability of engineers to go to the site to actually undertake the supervision, IFAD intervened by actually, asking the government to hire additional engineers to bring them into the field, to make sure that these evaluations take place. I mean, the supervisions take place, the site inspections and all that take place, so that the infrastructure can move faster. That's one. The other area of challenge is basically when it comes to sequencing is that most of our projects tend to not, when you sequence a particular infrastructure, we don't really take into account the low seasons. Low seasons means the off seasons due to weather that can affect what you call typically the implementation of an infrastructure program. So you start a tender process, okay, then comes, or you launch a particular tender process and the contractor starts work year one. And it's supposed to be a 6 months infrastructure, but they start the work maybe in January or February, or let's say March, and by within a span of 2-3 months, the rainy season starts. So the infrastructure is stopped. The contractor gets demobilized. He mobilizes elsewhere and starts focusing on other stuff in other areas while waiting for the rainy season to be over. So mobilizing out of that area into a new location and then coming back takes a while. And this increases cost of doing business and also delays infrastructure. So a lot of it has to happen with timing, basically planning, as well as managing the contracts of infrastructure. The supervision part of it is key if you really want to ensure quality of infrastructure itself. That's where the quality parts become a bit of a challenge over a period of time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Shankar. And before giving the floor back to my colleague Alexander, I would like to give another round of thanks to the 5 speakers. So Paxina Chileshe, Ivan Cossio, Tarek Kotb, Roshan, Cooke, and Shankar Achuthan. Thank you very much. And then now I think the floor goes to my colleague Alexander Voccia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.